So, welcome back to 3rd Age Reforged and to another battle replay and to the finale of this little episodic series that we've been going through these past couple of battle replays. This grudge match between the Dwarves and the Elves, which will now reach its conclusion here at the somewhat more evil looking now Gates of Erebor, which perhaps shouldn't be too surprising considering that the Dwarves were the aggressor in this particular battle and they have taken up with Sauron's old enemy, the Easterlings. It's also rather ironic because one of the concluding things in the War of the Ring was the Dwarves and the Men of Dale making a final stand, really very close to this very spot, that would have made such an alliance rather improbable, but yet here we are. Dale itself is right here. You may recognise this map as well. I mean, this is a representation of Dale. This was a map which once upon a time was used for a recreation of the Battle of the Five Armies. Of course, we have seen different variants of Dale rise and fall since that battle replay actually came out. But it's neat to see this one get utilised again. It is a very big map, very multifaceted as well. It's going to be very interesting to see where this one goes, with the forces of Dale nestled within the settlement itself, and then the Easterlings coming to the aid of two Dwarven armies as they are out here on the open field, perhaps getting ready to besiege and ultimately invade Dale. But as I'm sure you can see, they're going to have to rethink their plans because the Elves have arrived. Will that be enough to tip the scales in their favour? It's hard to tell really who's going to be the attackers and the defenders here, because actually we do also see Dorwinion over here, which is rather interesting. The Avari coming to the aid of their Elven brethren. Of course the men of Dorwinion would certainly be more inclined to assist the Elves in such a grudge match when you compare their relations with the Elves and the Dwarves, supplying all that wine to Thranduil's cellars. But I suppose we will go through the blue team first, because they are more likely to fill the role of attackers. So we shall start off with Ankles, who are going to be seeing the battle from the perspective of today. It was Flame of Arno who sent me this one, just like the other two as well, but we are not going to be seeing it from his perspective at this time. Ankles is going to be playing as one of the two Mirkwood armies. Will they be able to finally put the Dwarves to rest after this? We shall see. We'll get a full-blooded encounter between the Elves and the Dwarves out here, which would have happened had it not been interrupted in the Battle of the Five Armies proper. Some upgraded Hiriak, excuse me. The added armour will help, of course, because Mirkwood, they can always rely on really good armour piercing. They can always rely on really good melee defense, and obviously spears are more defensive by their very nature anyway. Good shield value on them by default. Adding that armour upgrade on them makes them a really effective frontline combatant. It's going to be difficult even for really high quality Dwarven infantry to cut their way through them quickly. Some of the higher tier Dwarven infantry, of course, will be able to, because the Hiriak are still subject to the spear malice. That is the downside to a unit such as this. Just in behind them, however, we will start to get into some of the units that will be able to go blow for blow with Dwarven infantry in their own way. Again, more focused around melee defense and outright damage, but with the armour upgrade, as I said, even in those terms, they're pretty decent, puts them more in line with someone like Lothlorien. The Hiriauth add that shield value in as well, a really accomplished line infantry. Of course they're expensive, but when you're in a custom scenario like this, that is not the sort of thing that will really bother you. You don't pick your armies after all, they are assigned to you. Apologies for that, it's not often that I get a phone call at this time in the evening, on a weekday no less, but still, as I was saying, the Hiri Lang offers something that really the Dwarves don't have, a upper end heavy swordsman like this, based around their base damage and their melee defense almost exclusively, where you see similar Dwarven units will very often be armor piercing shock troops. So yeah, the Hiri Lang offers something that they don't, but again, with how much the Dwarves pack on the armor, a bit of armor piercing wouldn't really go amiss, but Merc would achieve that through other means, and this is still the sort of unit that will be very useful, especially against the Easterlings, remember, who are also on the field today. Mirkwood tend to match up pretty well against them, as we have seen in the past. Hiri Pang are also here, heavy archer for Mirkwood. Mirkwood tends to be much more about their damage, more so than about their longevity in a skirmish fight. Again, just about outclassing the enemy rather than outlasting them. The Hiri Pang meld these two philosophies a little bit more so, especially when you upgrade their armour, than most other of the Mirkwood skirmishers, which are much more lightly armoured generally, at least until you get into their higher tier units. Hiri Pang also, like other heavy Elven archers, do tend to have a good bit of utility in melee as well. Greenwood Watchers, they're of course assassins. They've got that armor piercing missile attack, as well as being kind of difficult to deal with in melee because they're capable of doing a lot of damage, as well as having a ton of melee defense as well, very much in line with the rest of Mirkwood's army. What does let them down, however, in the same way that some of the other basic Mirkwood units, or a lot of Mirkwood units outside of the heavy units, which to be fair, most of Ankles' army does seem to be made up of, very lightly armoured, so if they do get caught out in the open by missiles, especially when you consider the likes of Erebor's crossbow skirmishers, the Eastlings have also got a very multifaceted roster in that regard. The Greenwood Watchers could find themselves in some significant trouble. Wardens of Amon Lank, very useful unit for Mirkwood to have when they're going up against the dwarves, because yes, they're very good at long range with their arrows, but they also wield that two-handed axe, which is going to deliver that armour-piercing damage that Mirkwood will want to be doing. As of course will the mighty Elven King's Palace Guard, certainly the most effective infantry unit that Mirkwood can bring against pretty much any foe. They don't really have an obvious weak spot in what they're capable of doing. Armour piercing, really good melee defense, really good base damage, an anti-cavalry bonus as well, which is somewhat atypical for a unit like this. They're not the best in any one area, but the fact that they spread their strengths out so much means there's not really anything they can't do. And there's not very many units that would want to go toe-to-toe with them in the entirety of the game. Elves of the Elven King, Silverthorn arrows might make it more difficult for a faction as slow and plodding as the dwarves to manoeuvre around the field in the way that they would like, and of course they're fantastic in melee as well. Just move on to the cavalry also. This could be the first units that we see in action actually, with the Huntsmen of Amon Lank, a couple of units of them, and a unit of Sindar the Girdle, so a really high quality army actually this from Ankles. These cavalry units can be quite fragile. Sindar the Girdle, once their hit points are gone, Huntsmen of Amon Lank just generally as well, but the dwarves and the Easterlings are a little bit exposed out here on the open field. We shall have to wait and see what they do, although I believe I will be posting the battle summary in the comments below, or no, in the summary below I should say, so that you can see that to really get across the story of the battle. But I believe Mirkwood won't be able to advance immediately. I might be wrong about that, but that is something that you should be on the lookout for. Flame of Arnor himself is also here, so a big thank you to him for sending this battle replay too. We'll go through this army a little bit more quickly, because I imagine it's going to be much the same sort of thing. Certainly a much more robust and forthright Mirkwood army than perhaps we'd be used to from a regular battle. More Elven King's Palace Guard, more Hiri Auth, he's got some more cavalry, the Huntsmen of Amon Lank, upgraded Hiri Auth, Hiri Ek, more Huntsmen, Elven King's Palace Guard yet again, 2 units of them, so an incredibly strong selection of Elven units here. It's going to be all for the red team to do. It's going to be very difficult for them. We've also got the Elves of the Elven King there, more Sindar the Girdle, and more Greenwood Watchers, Wardens of Amon Lank also. Skipping across to the settlement, we have Lurk, who is going to be playing as Dale. I'm sure they're quite sad to have to go up against their previous best friends in the dwarves. Bardian Marksman. Contrary to Mirkwood, who are much more about their damage and outclassing rather than outlasting, for Dale it's the opposite. They're very much about outlasting at range. They'll be able to do so against the Eastlings, but the dwarves are a little bit different in the way that they are crossbows, so if you get in range of them, those crossbows are going to be a real problem, but Dale can really pull them about the field with their heavy archers if they choose to. We've also got the Earls of Dale over here, which are a very effective unit of heavy line infantry, a really good quality unit. They fly under the radar, I think, a little bit, in the sense that they are, in many ways, on a similar sort of level to stuff like the Alcarondas Legion. Difference being that Dale don't really have the really solid infantry corps to base around the Earls of Dale like certain other really good infantry factions have, which is perhaps why they don't get the credit they deserve for being as good as they are. Really, you only have the Barding Herd as a similar kind of tier of unit, whereas factions like Umbar, the dwarves just generally, have obviously got significantly more options with regards to that. Dalian Paladins, a real scare for the dwarves in particular. That armour piercing going to be very, very useful against them. Some civilians with some Barding Herd blocking the bridge entrance. Dalian Royal Guard and Kelduin River Patrol as well for that ranged punch, both at long range and slightly closer. Javelins will always be useful against the dwarves, of course. Some upgraded Bardian Marksmen, nice to see them, in addition to a few more Elves. Relatively small army this from Dale, which is kind of interesting. And then, finally, for the attacking team, or at least what I've dubbed as the attacking team, we have Zrosso 1 playing as Dorwinion. Nice to see Dorwinion on the field as well. The Elvelin, the more defensive aspects, the heavy armour that is provided by them, really, really useful. They are relatively unremarkable in terms of what they're capable of doing in melee. They'll do what they say on the tin. They'll hold the line, they'll stay alive for a long period of time as long as they're not faced with a huge amount of armour piercing. And also they've got decent stats in terms of their longevity as well. They've got decent stamina, that sort of thing. But they're not going to pull up any trees in melee against the dwarves because of their quality, and they'll be not immensely well placed to fight the Eastlings either because of that armour piercing that they bring to the table. Elvelin Marksmen offer a similar sort of thing as the Dalian Archers, in that they're going to be really good at outlasting the enemy. Elvelin Infantry, of course, are the swordsman variant of the spears we've already seen. Got some Elven influence in their army as well. Morroquendi pikes are a really useful thing for them to have, honestly. Mirkwood don't have any phalanx units of any kind. Doesn't look like Dale have got any of their Lake Town pikemen either, so the Morroquendi pikes could be the only pikes that we see, or are the only pikes that we see from the attackers. Maybe the only pikes on the whole field. We'll have to wait and see what Erebor have brought to the table. Elven infantry. We've also got some really high tier units back here as well. The Morroquendi Glade Masters, a very, very similar kind of unit to the Elven King's Palace Guard, and the Elven Hammer Guard, a much more focused unit in terms of what they're all about. They're designed to take a decent amount of damage, but primarily chuck out a bunch of armor-piercing damage with those hammers that they have. And we've also got some Nandor Glade Riders who've got a very impressive charge on them. We shall have to wait and see if that proves to be decisive. Now then, we have Jen Mumu playing as the Easterling reinforcements to Erebor. The Gamprim, armor-piercing, will be quite handy against the human elements of the attacking armies today. Although I'm not really sure whether to classify them as the attacking armies, to be honest with you, because this battle can, and I'm sure will, involve both sides having to go on the attack at some point or another. Gamprim, they could be really useful against the Elves though, honestly, because while the armor piercing isn't too useful against Mirkwood, that phalanx formation is the sort of thing which can really be Rhun's saving grace here, because they're not going to be able to outmuscle the Elves in any other way. They're going to have to try and pin them in with stuff like the Gamprim, and then use maybe their more damaging projectiles like their crossbows and their javelins. Fully upgraded Easterling clansmen. I mean, yes, they're upgraded, but it's going to be hard for them to make much of an impact in the battle, considering the quality that especially Mirkwood have got on display. It's a huge amount of power they've got behind them. Variag mercenaries can skirmish well enough with the enemy, but I feel as though, again, if it's Mirkwood they're having to face, then all they can really do is stave them off for a little while before eventually being overrun. Considering what Dale have got on the field, maybe the more defensive qualities of Dorwinion, they could do okay there. A little bit more damage focused Narim, flaming shot as well. The shadow bows are an interesting one because we haven't actually seen any other units of rangers on the field so far, although they may very well be hidden, of course. Shadow bows, exactly the sort of thing which, again, rangers in anyone's hands, regardless of whether you're on the attack or the defense. If you use them well enough, they can be something that can really turn the tide of a game. Balkoth tribesmen, javelin's going to be doing their thing. Flagrim, as I've said, the armor piercing will be really useful against the Elven of Dorwinion and a lot of the Dalian units as well. But just in general, they need to be that bulwark for Rhun against even the Elven units they're going to be facing. Carmel's chosen as well at the centre of their army. Good to see they've got the crossbows. It's the sort of thing which the red team are going to have to utilise, because it's something which the blue team do not have access to, and we've seen how powerful they can be in the past. Scion Rim, again, very good at being that defensive unit. Look, in Asrim, I mean, with only one unit of runic cataphracts, they're going to get swallowed whole, I would imagine, by the Mirkwood cavalry as it moves forward, but it does give them a bit of mobility they can use with these two units to at least try and cover their movements across the field. Now, moving on to Farkin, who is playing as one of the Dwarven factions. He has got some Hammer Guard, 2 units of Hammer Guard in fact, so they've got a little bit more quality backing them up on horseback, or goat back I should say, than their Easterling allies. Ironfoot Spears, obviously you expect the dwarves to have that rigidity to them. Ironfoot Spears and Warriors should be able to do really well as a unit against an understrength Dale army, if that is indeed what it is. They do have some pikes as well, not quite as strong as the Morroquendi pikes of the Ironfoots, but again, if the dwarves can balance their strengths here and move forward as a unit, they should be fine. It's the first time we've seen the Erebor Legionaries in this little episodic series as well, which is good for the dwarves because really high quality unit flying infantry is going to be the sort of thing they're going to have to rely upon here. More warriors, a couple of units of Axguard of Erebor, and at the centre of this force is going to be the Highborns of Erebor. We also have the Ironfoot Wargoats over here, a couple more units of them. So plenty of cavalry on display today actually. There are more wide open sections to the battlefield, but there are also very constricted ones, so how and when both teams use their cav could end up being one of the really decisive factors in this battle. And finally we have Toby Lerone playing as the final Erebor army. Got some Ironfoot Hammer Guard, got some Axguard of Erebor, some Wargoats. Does he have any different units? He's got some Ironfoot Warriors, not a lot of crossbows in that previous army I'd note. Ironfoot Wargoats, more Highborns. He does have some crossbows over here. He also has the very frightening Blacklock Engineers, body piercing the crossbows. This is the sort of thing which they're going to have to use to really good effect against the quality, especially of those Elven units. Pikes, they've also got the mighty Dragon Slayers. That's a good amount of armor piercing that they can do. Erebor Legionaries, plenty of Ironfoot Spears. This is a scary army actually, this from Toby Lerone. Obsidian Guard are one of the units which can really go toe to toe with the Elves as well. They combine having huge armor values with really good melee defense from having those dual wielding weapons. They don't necessarily do damage all that quickly considering the tier of unit that they are, but doing damage to them is also very, very hard. And then the Sons of Durin, a little bit more focused around dealing damage, it must be said, but armor-piercing damage. So will that be the way forward? Will that be good against Mirkwood? They do have the armour upgrades, I suppose, but we'll just have to wait and see. I will make a little bit of a cut, because I'm not sure where the first battle is going to take place, whether the red team are going to try and make an aggressive movement into the settlement over here of Dale, or whether the red team are going to try and form up a defensive position. It's going to be hard for them, because they're right here in the most open section of the battle, caught between their foes, and the Mirkwood armies in particular are looking very, very scary. We shall have to wait and see how this battle kicks off. So yeah, I'll make a cut and we'll rejoin to the start of the battle, whatever that may be. So as I was saying, the setup in this battle really is quite intriguing, because I don't know quite what technically the defenders are going to do in this situation. They're outnumbered by a whole army. The Mirkwood armies are very, very dangerous. The Ironfoot Wargoats are already going to be moving backwards, presumably to try and ward off any super aggressive actions from the Mirkwood cavalry, but I think this is the only thing they can do. I think trying to run for cover within a settlement that the blue team already hold on to is the only way, because if they stay out here in the middle of the map in the open field, they're going to get sandwiched in between two forces, and they don't necessarily have the ability to rely on sheer quality either, and they're going to be also focused down from long range. All four of the blue team factions here have got access to some pretty good archers. Dale may be a little bit more on the defensive side of things, but even still, it's going to be potentially a bit of a bother for them. It's going to be difficult this for the red team, honestly. I would say that this battle certainly starts off tilted slightly in favour of the blue team, purely because of the initial position they find themselves in, albeit I do think that Dale and Dorwinion are maybe have a little bit less strength in their armies than the dwarves of Erebor have in theirs. But yeah, you can see Farkin's army crossing that bridge, and the other part of Farkin's army is also there. Toby the Roan can cross over a completely uncontested bridge, and that could be a way. You could also try and run for cover in those hills over there, which would be something else potentially they could do. Mirkwood have moved forward, but they haven't been super aggressive in their movements. Bardi and Marksmen are going to start firing on the dwarves as they cross the bridge. There's also some black projectiles there from the Dalian Royal Guard, though not the Blackshot Dragon Slayer, so it's not as devastating as it could be. But this is still a very large clump of Dwarven infantry units that are going to be taking damage as Dale start to open up on them from across the way. They aren't going to be able to make it across these bridges in time to begin their assault before the Dorwinion reinforcements arrive, so there is going to be a little bit of extra help for the brave Dalian defenders of their home. All they really need to do is hold the line here, though, Dorwinion and Dale, because the inevitability of Mirkwood's arrival is something which the red team are going to really struggle to deal with. Unless they can find a really good place to dig in, it's going to be a problem for them. Keldon River Patrol are revealed. They're going to go a little bit closer, and javelins are one way that you can get a lot of really good value off against the dwarves. While down over here, first engagements in terms of infantry, actually. Jen Mumu moving forward with his Easterling clansmen. I mean, the dismounted Elves of Dale are certainly a superior infantry, and even with the armour upgrade, the Easterling clansmen nowhere near the same level of quality. The formation is a little bit more preferable for the Eastrons, though, but more of the runic army is going to need to cross the river, and again, they really have the incentive to do so, because as soon as Mirkwood arrive, if they're still caught out in the open field, they're going to get absolutely battered. Bardi and Marksman firing across the way, trading in terms of arrow fire with the runic archers. That's certainly a fight that Dale would like to take. Athala Rangers, I think they were shooting, but they have since stopped. Let's go out over here meanwhile, because the Mirkwood cavalry is on the way, and both forces of cavalry clashing with one another. It's an interesting little engagement, this. I think overall I prefer the Mirkwood cavalry in melee, but I think a lot of it's going to come down to shape here. And there are a few overlaps forming against the Mirkwood cav, and if that happens, the slightly more lightweight nature of these Amon-Lank units may start to become a bit of a problem, and you can see the heavy-duty nature of the dwarves has really done a huge amount of damage to the Mirkwood cav over here. I think a large part of that is the Ironfoot Hammer Guard, honestly. If the Hammer Guard are not being met by the Sindar of the Girdle, it's going to end in tears for Mirkwood, and so it has turned out to be here. Mirkwood still have plenty of cav, and it's going to be trading back and forth here. That's one way, potentially, that the red team can really make this work for them. If they can outright win the cavalry fight, that means that the Mirkwood army is going to have to traverse a rather large open space over which in particular the Dwarven cavalry here could be able to get some really nasty charges off, and those Elven units are not as large in terms of numbers as some of the others. Meanwhile, the Dwarves have established a pretty decent beachhead over here, but they are also bottled up somewhat. The Ironfoot crossbows are here. You can see that the Dwarves are actually running for the high ground over there, which is all well and good, but it does mean that they are essentially leaving Farkin's contingent of the Dwarven army to die, because he's not going to be able to get through here all on his lonesome. With the Dorwinion reinforcements, the Elvalin marksmen firing at point-blank range. Elvalin Vineguard are not going to be up to the same sort of standard as the Ironfoot units they're facing, but the real problem here is going to be the Elven pikes that are along with them. Few projectiles finding their marks, however, as well. Those Ironfoot crossbows could yet do a fairly decent amount of damage. Meanwhile, the Dwarves are flooding into the settlement over here, so perhaps Farkin can come to his own aid, and maybe the Easterlings can also be of assistance. There's one officer from the Dalian Paladin unit who is surely going to be cut down here. It's a little bit of a worry, this, for Dale, though. Some of the Dorwinion units are going to need to get over here and wrap things up a little bit more fully than this. Axguard of Erebor charging in. I mean, the Dalian Paladins, as far as a singular infantry unit on the field today goes, they might be the best counter to a lot of what the Dwarves have, because they're armour piercing and they're also thoroughly attack focused, unlike the Elvalin Hammerguard, who've got a little bit more of a defensive edge to them. How are Rhun getting on? Rhun are getting on just fine. I mean, still you can see this single unit of dismounted Elves of Dale is holding the line all on their lonesome, but that will not last for too much longer. Flagrim are coming from the front, and now they're also completely surrounded. Even if it is just clansmen, they are now utterly exposed in terms of what their melee defense is capable of. The Bardian marksmen, you can see the Bardian marksmen have managed to get a good amount of value here on Rhun as they try to cross the river. As I said, time is of the essence. And this Mirkwood cavalry hasn't had the best of times, has it? I suppose that does answer a bit of a question in terms of what's going to be more useful here. I think that the Ironfoot Hammerguard have shown the Sindar of the Girdle the benefits of being a heavier unit, which is going to be able to withstand a little bit more punishment from all sources. Sindar of the Girdle all well and good, but also I think the Huntsman of Amon Lang too lightweight on this occasion. You can see that it has been a bit of a... It's been a mutually assured destruction, really. The Runic cavalry is almost completely melted as well. The Innis Rhun not really up to the task. There are some more goats left over there. But yeah, the Dwarves do have a bit of cavalry left, which will be useful in halting the rapid advance of the Mirkwood infantry over there. Dwarven cavalry trying to get into the settlement as well, which is kind of interesting. Some Easterlings going to be backing up the Dwarves. These Athala Rangers find themselves exposed. A combination of Highborns and regular Ironfoots are going to cut them down to the last man, so they will have got a few decent volleys off. We saw the clear white projectiles earlier, but they certainly won't be up to the sort of kill levels that we have seen in scenario battles that Rangers can reach. So this is a good pick for the Dwarves. I think actually the red team have done pretty well so far, winning that cavalry engagement out in the open field and managing to cross the bridges as quickly as this and without getting utterly vanquished is as much as they could hope for. And bear in mind, this is only one of the two Erebor armies as well. The other one has already scrambled for the high ground. Over here, meanwhile, a bit of a sacrificial wing of Farkin's army as the Dorwinion infantry continues to pin them in place. And still those Elvalin marksmen shooting into the Ironfoot crossbows. But you can see the benefits here as well. These Dwarven crossbowmen are pretty hardy, and basic arrow fire, such as the like that the Elvalin marksmen traffic in, is not enough to kill them off quickly. They are getting the job done, but it's slow. And you can see over here, crossbows, I think they're going after the Elvalin Hammerguard. They certainly should be, but it looks as though most of what they've actually killed is the standard Elvalin infantry there, the Moraquenti Glade Masters, another potential thorn in the side of the red team here. Again, more Elvalin marksmen. Quite a few archers are being exposed in melee here, which is bad news, especially when you're talking about trying to go toe-to-toe with the Dwarven infantry. As much as the Elvalin armour does help them withstand a bit of punishment, the difference in terms of quality here is pretty vast. The Dalian Royal Guard pulling back up the hill. Elvalin infantry now pinned between two quite nasty armour-piercing units, but also quite depleted armour-piercing units. Yes, the Easterlings pushing their way through here. The Bardian marksmen, who can actually do a decent job in melee, and they are defeating these strong clansmen. That fight will turn around fairly quickly when the Flagrim enter the fray, but Guardian Marksmen doing okay for themselves before that moment. They can continue to push up the hill now. Big cityscape settlements actually this. In danger of getting lost within it perhaps. Nandor Glade Riders moving forward. Good pick there as well. Very nice charge into an already depleted unit of Flag Rim, but that's going to pretty much flatten that entire unit of Easterlings. And over here, Variag Mercenaries potentially going to move forward. What's going on over yonder? Hiriek moving forward, so you can see Mirkwood are now arriving, which is bad news for the dwarves and the Easterlings within the Dalian settlement, because it means they are running out of time to really try and make their gains stick. They do at least have the wherewithal to turn a couple of units of Gamprim around to meet the advance of Mirkwood. And that phalanx in melee will actually be pretty useful. The problem will be when Mirkwood push a unit of archers forward and support them in that way, but good use there. Highborns of Erebor is still in the area. Meanwhile, over here, this unit of Bardian Marksmen also doing pretty well for itself in melee, but they are outnumbered and they will be bled out by these Ironfoot warriors. Elsewhere, yeah, Mirkwood have arrived here, and this is going to, once and for all, bring about the end of this small part of Farkin's army, and now Dorwinion and Mirkwood together will be able to push through the settlement. I don't think there's much of Dale left, to be honest with you. The original inhabitants of this settlement. Nandor Glade Guard pushing forward. I mean, yeah, it's really just the Dalian Royal Guard at this point. Glade Riders. It's looking pretty grisly at this point for the Eastlings and the Dwarves. What they need to try and do really is find a section of the settlement they've already taken and dig into that, so that they can at least try and make Mirkwood pay for every inch of ground that they take, and hope that they can do enough damage so that the Dwarven force that has retreated to the hilltop is able to carry the day for them. Really do like the upgraded model on the Bardian Marksman. Not going to be enough to save them on this occasion though. I don't know if the Shadow Bows have used up their ammunition. It would be a bit unfortunate if they had, because Rangers might be the sort of thing which the red team could really use to their advantage here. I do like how the battle is really clearly intended and has been crafted to shift in terms of focus, with initially the red team being the attackers, and that's going to shift as it goes along to the blue team being the attackers. Meanwhile, Balkoth Tribesmen, the Gamprim do need a little bit of support. The Scion Rim will provide that, but they need to get in here quickly. Easterling Javelins finding their marks into the heavier elements of the Mirkwood army. It's a lot of Javelins though. If that sort of punishment keeps up, that is a good way that they can whittle down the strength of these scary Elven armies. Oh, there goes the Dalian General. Caught in melee in the Royal Guard with the Highborns. So that's something. If nothing else, by the battle's end, Dale will have been completely destroyed. Nandor Glade Guard, we've already seen how dangerous they can be. Now Valen Marksman pushing up the hill. Dorwinion claiming this higher ground, perhaps in anticipation of Easterlings making their way up here. I mean, there's certainly some Ironfoot Hammer Guard, which is not the nicest thing to have to deal with, especially with all of these units being somewhat exposed. And they're going to go backwards. I mean, the Glade Guard, not the nicest opponent for cavalry to have to try and face. Nothing left over there. The Easterlings using their Gnar Rim, doing their best to do as much damage with their projectiles as they can, firing into as many of these Elven units as they can. Javelins finding their marks as well. That is the downside to these elite Elven armies. They don't have the most in terms of manpower, so every volley that manages to score some decent damage, some decent kills, is really going to add up as the battle goes along. Cummel's chosen some pretty good health actually, and they're going to be able to block the advance of the Mirkwood infantry. Forward comes some out of ammunition, Variag Mercenaries in support as well, so the bodyguard unit is not completely on its own. What's going on over here? A secondary line has been set up by the Gamprim. I think they may as well be pushed forward actually, because at this point Mirkwood have been stopped dead in their tracks. The addition of those Scion Rim offering the bastion that those Gamprim needed, and as if he heard me, Jan Mumu is going to commit that slightly depleted unit of Gamprim to keep this line as solid as possible. This does represent a bit of a challenge now actually for the blue team. because they do need to try and dislodge what is now primarily Easterling resistance within the settlement as efficiently as they possibly can, because if they don't, that is a really nasty road to have to try and attack up. Narim having to arc their shots quite a lot, so that's not going to be terribly damaging. This might be a little bit more of a problem though. They're not shooting down into those Mirkwood units, so they're shooting at the ones further inside this sprawl. Shooting over the buildings. What are they going after? Are they going to be going after... Yeah, they are. They're trying to kill off the Elven Hammer Guard, but they're better prepared than most units to withstand that kind of beating. Dorwinion continue to push their way up the hill, which is a little bit of a strange one, I must say. If they were moving to flank the Easterlings, that would be a little bit more understandable, but they seem to be allowing this Mirkwood reinforcing army to bear the brunt of most of the damage without offering too much in the way of help, which may end up coming back to haunt them slightly in the end. And they're actually getting actively chased as well by this unit of Variag mercenaries. Well, there goes the Easterling general. Easterlings are one of the more likely factions on the field to start routing as well, so that is a fairly significant gain. And there is the Carmel's Chosen, still in pretty good health though, 45 heavy infantrymen left alive. Whatever happens to that unit of Highborns, wherever they are, maybe they did all perish. Ironfoot warriors victorious up on the hill, Eastron crossbowmen getting down as well. Nice rear charge there from the Ironfoot Hammer Guard. Not entirely sure how they were allowed to pass. Ah, that way. And now these Elven archers, which have been offering some support from the opposite bank of the river, open to attack from a ever-decreasing unit of Hammer Guard, but 12 is still enough of a unit like this to be a bit of a problem for you. Pen can generally look after themselves in melee. Ooh, that's a little bit weird. Bit of a terrain glitch there. I don't know. I'm not sure where this battle is going. I think it hasn't gone as smoothly for the blue team as maybe they were hoping for. It's been certainly a bit of a mixed bag, but I think the red team, the Dwarf Easterling Alliance, can be pretty happy with how this has gone so far, given the position that they were in initially. It was never going to be an easy task for them. Dorwinion, meanwhile, I don't know if this is Rosso's general aim, but he really should be helping his allies out. Digging into a defensive position like this serves no purpose when your allies are perishing in front of you, and ultimately you have the upper hand. If you attack from the other side, the Easterlings will not be able to withstand you from here. And you already have some units committed. Singular unit of Vine Guard. Dale's still standing, 21 Dalian Royal Guard, who will offer the damage needed to help carve their way through those Variags. Easterling's starting to look a little bit battered and bruised, but being far more efficient than I thought they had any chance of being. And they are actively halting this Mirkwood attack that came from the bridge. You can see in the distance as well, there is that Dwarven cavalry in the open field, which may be heading towards the other part of the Mirkwood army. There's still a lot of Mirkwood strength out in the open field, undoubtedly being saved for the arduous attack up the hill. All the ways this battle could go, there's more than one way that this could have gone. And of all of them, this is one of the ones that is hardest to predict where it's going to go from here. A lot of it, I think, is going to come down to how many more kills the Easterlings can score before they are laid low. Still another unit of Variag mercenaries, seemingly an inexhaustible supply of these skirmishers that are out of ammo. Now Dorwinion sees the necessity, because Jan Mumu can set up his crossbows over here, and at that point you can just shoot at will into the forces that Dorwinion have got perched on that hillside. And he still can, to be honest. I mean, it's going to be a somewhat limited amount of time, because it really just depends on how long this unit of Variag mercenaries can hold the line, but that's all they need to do. Hold the line, and allow those crossbows to do their thing. There's other Easterling units as well. The Eastlings have been allowed to effectively focus on one opponent at a time, which is never what you want to allow. If at this point the blue team are taking on the role of the attackers, so they needed to pincer Rhun between them. They haven't really done that. It's not really Mirkwood's fault. They fulfilled their end of that particular bargain. Dorwinion, on the other hand, most certainly did not. And now, come all shadow bows have ammunition, Rim have ammunition, crossbows have ammunition. This could be quite painful for Dorwinion, but Dorwinion can also push their way through. That unit of Elven infantry, if it is deployed aggressively, can get in behind. That unit of Varag mercenaries is wavering. This is where the loss of the general could prove to be a bit of an issue as Dorwinion pour their units forward. Yeah, and that's going to be a rout, so they might be able to get away with it in the end. A few of those Elven pikes falling as there is a partial volley. That unit of Flagrim are shaken. I mean, the Elven units are absolutely the ones you want to go for. The remainder of the Morroquendi pikes, the Nandor Glade Guard, the really vulnerable stuff, and also the dangerous stuff. Much more damaging are the Elven units, and Morroquendi pikes are not what the dwarves are going to be wanting to face in the late game. Still, you can see over there one of my pet hates, saving your bodyguard units purely for the end, when even just committing one of them at this point would be enough to ensure that the Easterlings fall swiftly. In fact, yeah, the Morroquendi unit would be ideal against the Eastlings here, because I can understand wanting to save the Elven Hammer Guard for the dwarves later on, that armour piercing. Very handy. The announcer still confident of a blue team victory. Dorwinion also catching out what remains of this unit of Rim. They're routing. Scion Rim made of pretty stern stuff, but only 15 of them remain. Balkoth tries some being added to this front line to try and put up as much resistance as possible, but it's an even fight between themselves and the elves that remain at this stage. Yeah, at this point it's a desperate last stand from the Eastlings. Any kills they can get at this point just to help the dwarves will be appreciated, but Dorwinion slightly damaged. Flame of Arnor's Mirkwood army fairly substantially damaged, but then there's also another full health Mirkwood army. It's going to be all for the dwarves to do, but they also have a very nice defensive position up on that hillside. These strong crossbows are back there, trying to get as many volleys as they can. I mean, that will be how they manage to get the most kills of anything they have left. Whistling of those crossbow bolts as they go overhead. I mean, they could go for something like the Hammer Guard. There's a few Carmel's Chosen left, but this is where they will find themselves outmatched. They've been against foes that they outclass so far, the Carmel's Chosen, but now that they're bloodied, they're going up against a really, really strong unit of infantry in the Hammer Guard. That armour piercing gives them that extra edge as well. Still some Dalian units left alive, only 6 of them, but Dale's still kicking. 6 Highborns of Erebor, there they are then. Still living. Farkin's general coming down here, Hirial. The Balkoth tribesmen routing. The Gamperim surely not going to last too much longer with their fellow Easterlings routing right next to them. Perhaps with, well, yeah, they're going to rout now. Elven infantry make them rout. The Highborns will of course fight to the bitter end, as will their general, but it will be a bitter end. Slice his arm off. Very specific. Quite sadistic as well. Can't you just run him through and be done with it? 2 Carmel's Chosen remain. But it was a bold effort here from the dwarves and the Eastlings that invaded this settlement. I don't know how I expected it to go. I did fear that it would really go against them. But in the end, I think they've done a pretty good job. I mean, Dale are pretty much gone. And the Dorwinion and Mirkwood forces that did engage them have been bloodied for it. I don't know whether they've done enough necessarily to give the red team a chance at winning this battle in the later game, but we'll have to wait and see, won't we? There he is, the Dwarven General, the last holdout of resistance for the red team here. The Elves continuing to try and bring him down. He seems to just be standing there and accepting the punishment. And there he goes. And that's the dwarves gone. Don't know if there's anything left of the Easterlings. Doesn't look like it. Those are all routing units. Are those crossbows dead, or did they back up? No, they didn't. But I don't think we're going to have to make a cut either. I mean, this is where the battle is going to go from being fairly sprawling and multifaceted to a fairly classic siege where it tapers into more of a grind towards the end. The Hiri Peng trying to soften the dwarves up, but the dwarves, as we have learned, among most factions you can see here, that is a dense front line. I doubt they're shooting right into the front of the Ironfoot spears, but Toblerone's army, as with most Dwarven forces, are going to be pretty damn good at tanking arrow fire. Ironfoot crossbows shooting down the hill, but what at? You need to be very careful with this ammunition that you have, because that crossbow ammunition could be your saving grace, so you don't really want to be using it on units that you don't need to use it against. I'm not really convinced that Hiri Peng are necessarily the best target for them to go after. Perhaps I'm wrong. Hiri Ek are over here, or Hiri Peng on the way over. I mean, it's a very much a Mirkwood dominant attacking force now, with a Dorwinion accent to it. Several checkpoints, if you will, along the way of Dwarven infantry they're going to have to go through. There are the Erebor legionaries, and then Highborns, Obsidian Guard, Sons of Durin, Dragon Slayer, so all the best really of the Dwarven stuff. Again, bit of a pet peeve of mine, all of these elite infantry units back here. I would have, for each defence you intend to put on, at least one elite infantry unit on the front line, because in turn it forces the attackers to also commit in a big way. And there are Ironfoot action as well. I mean, the dwarves have got all the tools here to make this a thoroughly unpleasant affair for the Elves. The Elves, who under normal circumstances often find themselves with the luxury of a really good position to use their skirmishers in, and as we have learnt from several battles in the past, they don't necessarily do that well in this situation. When they have to attack into a really well fortified position, it can be pretty grisly for them, because they don't tend to have the numbers to be able to withstand the casualties that any army is going to take. It does look as though the Elves are going to be intent on doing this, so I think we probably need to be going up to ×2 speed where we can, because Hiri Peng are firing up the hill. Are they actually firing into this front line? No, they're not. They are going after the crossbows. I was going to say, like, the crossbows, while even this I would say is probably fairly questionable in terms of the amount of value that you're actually going to get, they are at least a little bit more vulnerable, the crossbows, than the Ironfoot spears and warriors, and also they're more important. Ironfoot spears and warriors you can ultimately deal with in melee with your own infantry. One thing I am noticing is that I think there was only 2 units, yeah, 2 units of pikes, which, I say only, that's still going to be a substantial amount given it is Mirkwood, but and all those Morroquendi pikes have already taken a bit of a beating within the settlement. But it is what it is, this fight. I mean, I would worry, in a sense, that Toblerone, while he has all of the tools, if he continues to dump too much of his ammunition into units like the Hiri Peng, it may end in tears for him. Rhun. The Elven war cries at range. It's the Elven and the Easterling ones. They seem to be incapable of being quiet when they're firing their missiles. Still Greenwood Watchers, Orders of Amon Lank. There's a lot of good quality units here. I just don't know whether they're heavy duty enough to be able to force their way through the dwarves if the dwarves organise themselves appropriately. On that count, we shall have to wait and see. But I mean, in terms of frames, we're actually only about halfway through at this point, if that. So it goes to show that this is going to be a grindy fight from here on out. And perhaps the Elves are going to try and play things in this way from this moment on. Don't blame them though. If they can bait the dwarves into using all of these crossbow bolts, then they absolutely should. Colour volley. Ladan. Where are they going? What is going on? Is there another route up this hill? There is. It's an awfully long way away though. So they're going to have to take their sweet time marching around. But I do wonder if the dwarves have seen that. I mean, surely they will. When they see the Elven army snaking around that way, they'll be like, what on earth are they doing? And then much like us, they'll discover that other road up there. That is a huge amount of their force as well. But they need to do that. I mean, that alone, just attacking from two directions, is enough to make me think that the blue team probably should go on and win this from this point. I don't. If it was one avenue of attack that the dwarves had to deal with, I think maybe they could have pulled this out of the bag. Pikes on the front line, crossbows in support, Blacklock engineers can level a whole army if they're used in the correct manner. Pulling those units off as well. I mean, that front line at this point is looking actually fairly open to attack. That unit of Hiri Pang is depleted enough that, to be honest, you may as well just dump what remains of the ammunition into the front of these dwarven units. At least you'll kill off a few of them before the melee inevitably begins. One unit has waved off. One unit of... is it the Blacklocks? I believe it is that have moved. Where are the Blacklocks going to go? Up here? Try and shoot down the Elven ranks as they move up that hill? Are they going to move forward here, the Elves? Just going to try and get closer and shoot at point blank. Going after Axeguard. So I mean, the Elves are alert to the situation. They're going after the one unshielded unit. Yes, they're still very heavily armoured, but a shield does make a big difference. The problem for the dwarves here now is they're not going to be able to pull all of these units off the front line. The Ironfoot Warriors are going to be trying to go on the attack, which is bold. There's a large amount of the Elven units are going the other way though, which if you commit too much to the other side, you still run into the problem of the dwarves can just set up their front lines more aggressively over on the other side, and you haven't really gained much. You want to be as even-keeled as you can with your attack here. You know, Ironfoot Warriors, they could be used as a rear guard at this point. Enough to save those spears and send them further forward. I mean, the Ironfoot Warriors are going to charge downhill, but 88 Hiriak, a few Hiri Pang. Yeah, the quality of the Elven units here should be enough to see them through against Erebor's basic unit of line infantry, especially when they don't have their armour upgrade. Archer support shooting at those Ironfoot spears. I mean, when they turn their backs to those Ironfoot spears, I imagine they would suffer a few more casualties. Victory scene sight in Hiriak. Very good defensive unit, especially that armour upgrade. A spearman with very few weaknesses other than the standard Elven one. Of not having a great deal of manpower per unit. They're going to send forward more unit of Hiri Lang. I mean, that would certainly mean that this fight would not last all that long. Some of those individual elves were pretty jittery there. Several units of Lang. Yeah, I mean, it is what it is. The dwarves are very much being eviscerated. Again, Toby Lerone sending his units down the hill, but again, sending a single unit to serve very little purpose other than to die is another one of those decisions which is questionable at best. It's not as if the Ironfoot Warriors are just a unit of fodder either. I mean, the flip side of that is they probably will get a few kills, but nowhere near enough to make this worth it. The Elves are going to be very dominant in this fight, both in terms of numbers and quality. Meanwhile, Zrosso is actually leading the way over here, his Dorwinion army leading the way a fair distance ahead of the first Mirkwood troops, but he still has a fair distance to go before he has to go all the way to the end and then all the way back up before he can reach the Dwarven defensive position. And just another example of this map being extremely large. And this is with 7 players on it, and they still feel as though they're almost lost within it. Was, as I said, made with the Battle of the Five Armies scenarios in mind. And there goes the Ironfoot Warriors finishing off that individual unit of Dwarven infantry, and there's a few Elven corpses on the floor, but nowhere near enough to make that battle worthwhile for the Dwarves. Ironfoot Warriors still. A few Elven arrow volleys. The Ironfoot Spear is going to take very little in the way of losses over time, but still, every little helps, as they say. Oh, the Elves going to... I mean, if I were the Elves, I would actually attack at this point, because even if the Dwarves commit more to this fight over here, it's going to give more of an opening for your allies on the other side. And I would be getting itchy feet at this point. I would want to attack. Want to do something. And the Ironfoot Spears, that Spear Malice, certainly a defensive unit. They're not really going to be the sort of thing which is going to be too much of a problem for the Elves in melee, provided they commit forward enough numbers. They do have potential reinforcements up here. More Ironfoot Warriors, Axeguard, but even then, crossbows. I'd attack. I'd just attack. It's the fun thing to do. Player has admitted defeat. Probably one of the ones that has already perished earlier on. I mean, these Blacklocks are in a pretty nasty position. That's another reason why I'd attack on the other side as well, because you wouldn't have to deal with the Blacklock Engineers, by far the scariest tool that the Dwarves still have left, even with all of their bodyguard tier infantry units. The damage that the Blacklocks can do in a short amount of time is significantly more frightening. Rosso still hasn't made it to the point where you can start climbing the hill yet. Meanwhile, over yonder, I can only imagine this fight isn't going to be as grindy as I thought, considering it's going to be an attack from two different directions. With that in mind, probably going to be maybe about 10,000 frames, rather fittingly again. Always a good barometer for when the final phase seems to be getting underway. You can tell he wants to. You can tell Ankles wants to move in. Go on, do it. Let the hate flow through you. Well, at least he's ready to attack when the time comes. Flame of Arnold. I don't know why units are just hanging around over there. Meanwhile, exciting stuff as we see he is about to round the corner, although given what Dorwinion have done up till this point in the battle, I imagine he's probably going to allow his Mirkwood allies to take the lead and cower behind them. Maybe that's a little bit harsh. Aha! I missed it. I heard the horn, but I wasn't sure I believed the attack was getting underway. But yes, the Ironfoot Spears are being tested in combat by the Elves as they move forward. Another infantry unit, I think, would be probably required to force their way through here. A lot of these units have already seen battle, a little bit war-weary at this point. The Ironfoot Spear line holding for the time being, and they will certainly do so with the arrival of those Axemen. A bit of extra attack power. Elven arrows being loosed in response to this. The axes do arrive on the front line. Elves are going to need more. And Ankles knows that. He's going to commit forward some Hiri Lang. Good man. We have a genuine fight on our hands. What else can they send in? Another unit of Hiri Ek wouldn't be a bad idea either. The melee defense of the Dwarves on this occasion, of the Elves I should say on this occasion, would be a problem for those Dwarven Spears, just in terms of racking up the kind of kills they need, because the Dwarves don't have any ranged support as it stands, although Toby is going to try and correct that by sending one of his Ironfoot crossbows over here to try and do the business. And this is the right thing to do, because he is going to need a bit of range support if he's going to make this front line a worthwhile endeavour. But again, he's just going after the archers, which, in a situation like this, if you don't support your infantry in some manner, they're ultimately going to fold. That unit of Hiriak was committed as well, so the Elves have committed the infantry reinforcements that will be required to force the Dwarves ever so slowly backwards. Axguard of Erebor victory still seems certain for them, so they're actually doing very well against the Elves so far. And there isn't too much in the way of infantry reinforcements immediately available. That unit of Hiri Lang is the closest. There's another unit of Hiri Alth from Flame of Arnor should he choose to commit a unit forwards. Hiri Ek forcing their way through, which is a problem for the integrity of the Dwarven line. Doubtless they're going to try and hunt down the crossbows rather than hit the back of the infantry though, which is the right thing to do, I think. If they get the chance to, which that door is going to be closed firmly shut with the arrival of that unit of Ironfoot warriors. Bad news for Mirkwood, to be honest with you, because some of those spears are fairly isolated at this point, but still, the Dwarven line is looking a little bit messy now. 66 Axguard of Erebor there. That armour does give them quite a lot of staying power for a unit of shock infantry, but they are still ultimately heavy axemen, so as time goes on you would imagine that a sustained fight like this isn't going to be too great for them. Hiri Peng. These crossbows are now starting to suffer quite a lot at the hands of those elven arrows. Meanwhile, over here, are we going to start to see Blacklock Engineers are not shooting just yet. The Hiri Peng are going to be in range to start trying to whittle the dwarves down, as they did on the other side. That looked like a blank fire to me. Indeed it is. They return to their standard pose. So the initial shot has been cancelled. Are they going to go after the Blacklocks? No, they're going to go after... Oh, I didn't even realise this. This is just straight up pikes on the front line without a shielded unit in front of them. So yes, they absolutely should try and whittle them down with arrow fire as much as they possibly can. The dwarves certainly backed into a corner at this point. I think I would be fairly confident in saying that the blue team from here should certainly go on to win the battle. The dwarves need to change their approach a little bit. I would even pull back the pikes just a bit more. Perhaps try and defend this. You'd still get the benefit of those axe throwers. I mean, it's going to be painful for Zrossa and Flame of Arnor going up this way, but it doesn't really matter, because as long as you're attacking from this angle, your ally on the other side should continue to have a bit of joy. The Elves continuing to force the dwarves onto the defensive. There is a bit of a gap in the defensive line now as Dwarven axes and Elven swords continue to clash with one another. The Ironfoot warriors continuing to do a decent job. Yeah, there we go. A rout. And that also is where having a bodyguard tiered unit on the front line would have really come in handy, because it would have helped keep them around of those spears together for longer. And your line would have lasted longer. Everything about it would have been better. Something like the Obsidian Guard would have actually have been really, really good as well because of their high melee defense. Really well suited for a long, grindy, mostly melee focused fight like that. Would have been the way to go in my opinion. As it stands, Toby Lerone is in real danger of having nothing but his bodyguard units at the end, and that's not going to be enough. They're going to have no support, they're going to be utterly outnumbered by the Elves, and they're just going to get crushed underfoot, and so the purpose of saving them for the end is completely null and void, which is why I always say it's a bad idea. Saw the benefit of using your bodyguard units earlier on in the battle actually, ironically by Rhun. Carmel's Chosen did very well in this fight. Blacklock Engineers. Getting ready to inflict some punishment on the attackers. They're having to arc their shots though. Generally a pretty bad sign. You can see pretty much every unit that gets hit by one of those black projectiles is falling, so Hiri Peng already taking a hearty amount of damage. Thought they were going to retreat for a second, then I was like, come on, you're the attackers. Show a bit of fortitude at least. Get in there. Oh, the dwarves going to come down here? This is a lot. I mean, this is better late than never, I suppose. Committing all three of those bodyguard units to maybe a counter-attacking action. trying to stop the progress of Ankles' army. Not going to be quick enough though. Ironfoot crossbows having to hold the line against Hiri Lung. That isn't going to go very well for Erebor at all. Hiri Lung marching up the field, or hill. Still a few Ironfoot warriors left down here, but they are now pinned against the wall, and the Elves will almost certainly slaughter them to the last dwarf. Peng ready. Elven King's Palace Guard, 49 of them. Defeat seems certain. Still, I mean, they're consistent in their approach, at least the attackers. They are very intent on whittling down this Ironfoot pipeline before committing themselves to the melee fight. And to be fair, they don't really have the phalanx capabilities to go toe-to-toe with this kind of thing in melee, especially if they have... I mean, there's some axe throwers in behind, some Erebor legionaries. I'm really surprised the Erebor legionaries are not stood in front so they can absorb most of this damage with their shields, but to each their own. I mean, the Ironfoot axe throwers are a worry, certainly. But I think the onus should be on the attackers to maybe push forward a little bit more aggressively in this sort of situation. You have the edge. Like, it's very unlikely the dwarves are going to be able to fight their way out of this one. The least you can do is be a bit sporting and throw your army in. Make it a more vibrant affair, for lack of a better term. As it is, though, the pace of the battle was really good in the early section, but it has been very stop-start towards the second half. I think especially if you're going for some sort of theme like this in a scenario, a bit more in the second half of the battle, I think, is needed, rather than this sort of thing. It's still been a good battle, don't get me wrong, but there's just not much I can do to commentate on something like this until the actual battle gets underway, but I can't cut away either because there's still stuff relevant that's going on. Blacklock Engineers. Moving in, presumably out of ammunition. I mean, they are a multiple HP unit. They certainly don't have the same melee capabilities as the other Dwarven bodyguard units, but I mean, they're tough enough to still be a valued part of the Dwarven defence here later on. Erebor Legionaries moving in as well. Dorwinion attacking in a big way. The Elven Hammer Guard are on the front line. So they will be able to do the business now. Again, better late than never. Meanwhile, on the other side, what are we seeing? Sons of Durin. Ankle's army moving forwards. Dragon Slayers of Ered Mithrin moving backwards with the Sons of Durin. All four of the Erebor bodyguard units are going to have to try and take on the entirety of the army that Ankle still has left. And when you have a look at the numbers that they're dealing with, especially the kind of quality as well, Wardens of Amon Lank, Palace Guard, you realise just how hopeless the Dwarven situation from this point onwards is going to be. It may have been doable, like I said, if it was just one approach they were having to marshal, but two was always going to be too much for them. Morroquendi Glade Masters going to be able to carve their way through Ironfoot axe throwers in melee. Hammerguard have rather bemusingly been pulled out of melee now. Again, I'm really not sure what Zrosso is waiting for at this point. This is the final battle that you've been saving your bodyguard units for, surely. Now they're going in. Again, I don't want to break players across the coals too much, because it's very clear that a lot of these players are certainly on the newer side of things. But, yeah, future reference is... I'm sure that this sort of these sort of habits will be weeded out as time goes on. Meanwhile, I mean, it's not just the defenders, to be fair. The attackers have also been fairly guilty of fairly frustrating things as well, like being really overly focused on trying to skirmish down the enemy first before pushing in. It's a very campaign-esque sort of trait that I notice a lot of people have. where you can cheese the AI and use your missiles to be really, really effective in this sort of situation. Against other players, though, all it ends up doing is elongating the battle, and for no good reason at this point. You're going to win this as the Elves. Just commit your units forward in a good old-fashioned melee fight. Lots of Elven infantry moving in. The Palace Guard are also going to move their way in. Hammer Guard moving forward with some Mirkwood support. They'll be able to crush their way through those axe throwers. There's a few throwing axes coming in here, though. Iri Lang arriving on the front line also. I mean, a pretty good target for the Ironfoot axe throwers, to be fair. Something like the Iri Lang, very damaging, unshielded. All of that high base damage that axe throwers have. Able to be fully deployed, fully expressed. Waiting. They're going to push their way forwards, not allow themselves to take any more damage, force the axe throwers into either retreating or melee. And it's going to be melee. Toby Lerone not going to react quickly enough to stop the axe throwers from being engaged. And that is going to be a problem. Again, they are durable in melee, but they certainly don't have the killing power to go toe-to-toe with a unit of Elves like this. I'm honestly quite surprised the battle's only 3k frames long, because that implies that these bodyguard units are actually going to fall by the wayside faster than I would have expected. Palace Guard are in there, defeat seems certain, but then Dragon Slayers, Sons of Durin, Highborns, Obsidian Guard, there's a lot of quality over here bound up in these 4 units. Imagine if it had been more evenly distributed throughout the Dwarven defence. As it is, though, Ankles' army is clearly going to take a lot of damage, but it's going to be able to wear the dwarves down as well. Warns of Ammon length. Those armour-piercing axes would be very useful in melee. As many units as they can muster coming forward. I mean, this does go both ways. Like all of these heavier Elven units, it's not exactly the easiest unit for the dwarves to hack and slash their way through in as efficient a manner as possible. With Watchers moving into position, first time we've seen them in this battle, or trying to use their throwing daggers as best as they can. There's not an awful lot of Dorwinion left at this point either, so that's something else perhaps that the red team can take solace in. Both Dale and Dorwinion very much on their last legs. It's only really going to be Mirkwood left standing in any sort of capacity as this battle draws to its inevitable conclusion. Again, it's about time that the Ironfoot pikes push their way forwards into melee so they're not exposed to missiles and they're actually being useful in the melee fight. Watchers, Iri Lang. A unit of heavy swordsmen certainly wouldn't go amiss up here. Not sure how effective those missiles are being. Watchers trying to get a good angle, but struggling a little bit. What's going on down here? Elves of the Elven King pushing around. Warns of Ammon Lank starting to join in melee now as well. Those two-handed axes will be very useful. Well, they would have been very useful before they once again got pulled out of melee. It's been such a frustrating fight for that sort of thing. That much very clear, and you can see this is the problem with having only bodyguard units. Yes, the quality is very, very high per unit. There goes the Mirkwood General. And initially the dwarves are doing very well, but the elves have just got so much more in terms of numbers, and you know, obviously all of the Heard units are not exactly low in terms of quality either, like I said. You just don't have the numbers. If you're going to use a bodyguard unit like this, it is... If you think of the Nazgul as a good example of this sort of thing, if you isolate them, they're easy to deal with, really. But if they're embedded in other units, they can be a nightmare because they've got the support around them, they're difficult to single out, and slowly but surely they will gain a monumental kill count as the battle goes along. It's not as with other bodyguard units, it's not quite as extreme. and it's not quite a hard and fast rule like it is with the Nazgul, but the same sort of thing applies. And I hope that's a lesson that certainly Toby Lerone takes away from this battle with him today. Technically Dorwinion need to learn that lesson as well, although because they're on the winning side they may not learn it. We shall have to wait and see. I mean, again, I would have expected the battle to go on a little bit longer, considering, unless maybe it's you just have to get to the tower. Elves of the Elven King. They've reached the hilltop. I mean, it doesn't really matter either way, even if the dwarves do admit defeat. It would be a little bit, if it's not part of the rules, it would be a little bit sad if that was the case, but it is what it is. Not really much else to say about this fight, is there, really? Very interesting, certainly early on. And the end of this episodic series is here. And it ends in... well, there goes the Dwarven General. I suppose that the Dwarf King has now been felled, and so that is it. That is the end of the fight, and there you have it. And the Dwarves, I mean, humiliation really, isn't it? They lost every battle in this series, with the first one, of course, a failed invasion of the Woodland Realm. The second one, the Dalian reinforcements did manage to get through. They took a lot of damage doing so, but ultimately it was a narrow victory for the Dalians there. And here, in the final battle of the series, outside of the gates of the Lonely Mountain, they have been completely vanquished by the Elves. So a 3-0 series in favour of Thranduil and his Elves from the Woodland Realm. But yeah, this battle was certainly the most complicated of the three. The other two, the first one was just a straight-up siege. The second one, of course, was not just a field battle, technically speaking. It was Dale had to transition across the field, and they managed to do that. This one, though, was by far the most complicated, with the red team starting out as pseudo-attackers into the settlement. Thought they did very well at that, actually. I think, even though they got the lowest amount of kills, I think the Easterlings do deserve quite a lot of credit for what they were able to accomplish within the settlement. Again, they were helped a little bit by how passive Dorwinion became in that fight, but yeah, it is what it is. Dale getting the most kills of any of the armies, but then they were in the battle pretty much completely right from the off until the moment that their army was completely destroyed. So again, not too much of a surprise there. But yeah, interesting stuff. Let's see what did the damage for the Elven factions. I'd imagine it's several of the heavier units. Yeah, Hiri Peng. Bodyguard units weren't committed until later. That unit of Elders of the Elven King didn't get any kills, so that's a sign they weren't even used. Only one unit breaking 100 kills, so it's a sign again that maybe this army was held back till significantly later on. This army with a couple of others, Hiri Ek, Hiri Lang doing quite well. But yeah, Mirkwood, I think actually quite a lot of Mirkwood's kills will have come during the latter half of the battle for the settlement, and then just finishing off Toby Lerone as he perched on top of his hill. I don't know if it was a hard and fast rule that Toby had to retreat to that hill. I think there's a real case for saying if he wanted to send some of his units to the top of this hill, including his general, seeing as that was the victory condition, it would seem, fair enough. But if he had gone to the aid of his allies in the settlement, they could have wiped away Dale and Dorwinion and then put on a much more united front against the Mirkwood reinforcements, and that may have been a good way to go about it, if that was permitted. I think it would have been worthwhile, especially seeing as he had all of those Erebor bodyguard units, and if he had used them aggressively, which is a big if considering how he decided to use them on the hilltop here, being very reluctant to push them forward. But if he had used them more freely in the settlement, it would have been really, really difficult for the blue team to counteract that sort of thing if they were used early. But again, ifs, ands, buts, maybes, doesn't really matter in the end. The Elves, victorious. And yeah, big thank you to the Flame of Arnor for sending me these 3 battles to cover in step. And yeah, if this is the sort of thing which people want to run more of in the future, I would be happy once again to show them off. And I would do so in the same manner as this one, obviously, where I would show them all in a row. It's much easier to keep track of then, you know, there's no getting confused. And yeah, definitely something a little bit different. It's the sort of thing which I have done once or twice in the past, but it's generally only been like one battle and then another one follows on from that. sometimes completely by accident, like with the Mountains of Mirkwood, leading into a battle on Thranduil's halls, which didn't actually have any link, but it just sort of worked out that way. This one, of course, very much intentional. Yeah, be interesting to see if this is the sort of thing which happens a little bit more often in the future. Anyway, as for what's going to be coming up next after this, I would imagine by the time this one comes out, we will be staring down the barrel of a Rise of Mordor video. And it's either going to be the video directly after this one or the next one following on from that. It depends on which day it falls on. And the intention is to have that be a top 5 or top 10 video, depending upon what it's going to be. I would imagine it's probably going to be a top 5 video, to be honest with you, based on what I've seen already. And we'll start off by looking at units in that manner, following on with some faction overviews as well. It's the sort of thing which is going to be running alongside the standard battle replays, but yeah, be on the lookout for that. As for other battle replays, there's going to be another Silmarillion one coming up soon. And there's also going to be a few more scenarios that I've got on this one. Another one which is very Dorwinion focused, them on the defence against a combination of Mordor and Rhun. And there's also another scenario from Eclipse, which is a beach landing from Harad against the men of Cardolan. Again, another custom map, another rather interesting one that we've got to look forward to. So yeah, plenty in the pipeline. There's also some classic sieges of Dale and Erebor, which I've got. So yeah, plenty of content which should stretch a fair ways into December at the very least and take us up towards Christmas and the new year, where hopefully things will become a little bit more clear as to what I'm going to be doing with regards to some new hardware as well. So yeah, it's all good really. So, big thank you once again to Flame of Arnor and all the players that were a part of this battle replay and a part of the previous 2 in this episodic series. Hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.